It was a Sunday night when the Philippines watched the sky turn violent, winds tearing at 185 kilometers per hour, storm surges threatening to swallow entire neighborhoods. Authorities ordered nearly 1 million people to leave their homes. But as Super Typhoon Fung-Wong made landfall, even early warnings felt too late. How did the nation respond when nature's fury pushed its people to the breaking point? Typhoon Fung-Wong's approach was tracked by meteorologists across the Western Pacific, its rapid intensification setting off a chain of urgent bulletins. By late Sunday, the storm's core had grown to nearly 1,800 kilometers in diameter, with sustained winds reaching 185 kilometers per hour and gusts up to 230 kilometers per hour. The Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical and Astronomical Services Administration, PAGASA, classified Fung-Wong as a super typhoon and warned of destructive winds and life-threatening storm surges. Satellite data revealed a tightly wound spiral of clouds with a well-defined eye forming as the system crossed the Bicol region early Sunday morning. Rainfall forecasts predicted more than 200 millimeters would fall over Luzon in the coming hours, with Metro Manila facing up to 200 millimeters as well. As the storm skirted the Polillo Islands that afternoon, PAGASA's advisories grew more urgent, highlighting the risk of flash floods and landslides in areas with already saturated soils. At 9:10 p.m. local time, Fung-Wong made landfall over Aurora province, unleashing its peak winds on the eastern coastline. The force of the storm uprooted trees, snapped power lines, and sent debris flying through the air. PAGASA meteorologists issued warnings for coastal communities to brace for surges that could inundate entire neighborhoods. The impact along the coast was sudden. By 2 a.m., the typhoon had weakened as it crossed into La Union, its core losing strength over the mountains of Luzon. Still, the storm's sprawling rain bands continued to dump torrential rain, raising the threat of landslides in highland areas and flooding along river valleys. A PAGASA meteorologist said that Fung-Wong reached sustained winds and seas. It's hasty winds of 185 kilometers per hour at sea. He added that the scale of rainfall from the Bicol region across Luzon meant the risks were highest for flooding and landslides. Forecast maps showed the storm's path cutting a wide swath from the eastern seaboard through the heart of Luzon, with rainfall accumulations expected to overwhelm drainage systems. Destructive wind advisories remained in effect as the typhoon tracked inland, and emergency alerts continued to warn of surges along the coast. With the physical hazards now clear, namely wind, rain, and surge, the focus turned to how communities and authorities would respond to the unfolding crisis. Mass evacuation. Nearly 1 million people left their homes as Typhoon Fung-Wong closed in, creating one of the largest mass evacuations in recent Philippine history. In towns like Bala and Dinalongan, families packed into gymnasiums, classrooms, and hastily converted sports centers. In Aurora's main evacuation site, rows of mats and blankets covered the basketball court, each patch of floor claimed by a family hoping to ride out the storm in relative safety. At risk, many of those arriving at shelters came from low-lying coastal villages and riverbanks, areas flagged by officials as most at risk from storm surges and flooding. Catanduanes, a small island province often battered by typhoons, saw entire barangays move inland in a matter of hours. Local authorities used jeepneys and borrowed trucks to shuttle residents to higher ground, while barangay captains went door to door, urging families to leave before the winds picked up. Shelters. Inside the shelters, the scale of the crisis became clear. Children clung to parents, some restless, others silent with worry. Water rations were stretched, and families waited in long lines for meals distributed by volunteers. For those with chronic illnesses, the lack of medicine was a constant concern. Makeshift registration tables struggled to keep up with the flow of new arrivals, and in the chaos, some families became separated. Hagunoy, 21, had spent the morning boarding up the hotel where he worked along the coast. By early afternoon, the warnings grew more urgent. He gathered his younger sister and joined the evacuation to the sports center. I secured the hotel with boards around noon, But when the warnings changed in the afternoon, I knew we had to leave. At the shelter, my main worry was my little sister. She was crying every time the wind picked up. For many children in the shelters, the fear was new. They had no memory of Typhoon Haiyan, but the stories of destruction still circulated among parents and neighbors. The anxiety was compounded by the recent devastation of Typhoon Kalmaegi, which had left hundreds dead or missing just days before. Poverty. In the crowded halls and gyms, the difference between those with sturdy homes and those from wooden shacks was stark. Families from poor neighborhoods were among the first to fill the shelters, their houses offering little protection from wind and water. The urgency of the evacuation, the uncertainty of what would be left behind, and the challenge of keeping families together, all of it played out in real time as Fung-Wong's arrival tested the limits of the country's disaster response. Confirmed reports from disaster officials put the immediate death toll at 2. In Katbalogan City, a man drowned as floodwaters surged through his neighborhood, while another resident was found trapped beneath collapsed debris. The landslide in Guinobatan, Albay, followed hours of relentless rain. Entire slopes gave way, swallowing homes and cutting off access to several barangays. Search and rescue teams struggled to reach affected areas as rivers overflowed and roads turned to mud. The storm's impact stretched far beyond the hardest-hit towns. Nearly 300 flights were cancelled across Luzon as airports shut down operations. Passengers spent the night in crowded terminals, waiting for word on when it would be safe to travel again. Airlines issued urgent statements, citing safety risks from high winds and poor visibility. The abrupt shutdown stranded thousands, including families trying to return home or reunite with loved ones in the middle of the crisis. Braced along the coast, hotels and private properties prepared for the worst. Workers lashed boards across windows and tied ropes around doors, hoping to keep out the wind-driven rain and protect what they could from the rising tide. In some cases, these last-minute efforts were not enough. Storm surges breached seawalls, flooding ground floors and scattering furniture into the streets. Power outages and other infrastructure failures quickly compounded the emergency. Power outages swept across Aurora and neighboring provinces, plunging entire communities into darkness. Mobile networks faltered under the surge in calls and messages, leaving many unable to reach relatives or emergency services. For those still in harm's way, every hour brought new uncertainty as the full scale of Fung-Wong's destruction came into view. Relief operations in Aurora came to a halt as Typhoon Fung-Wong swept in. Emergency teams were forced to abandon ongoing search and aid missions that had been responding to Typhoon Kalmaegi. In the words of an Aurora relief official, with Kalmaegi still straining our teams, the state of calamity allowed us to shift resources fast. But the funding was still not enough in those first 48 hours. People needed food, medicine, and shelter. We tried to prioritize the most exposed barangays. Nearly 200 people had died in the Philippines during Kalmaegi, and more than 100 remained missing. As Fung-Wong's winds battered the coast, trucks loaded with relief goods for Kalmaegi survivors were rerouted to new evacuation centers. Some shelters, already full, now faced double the demand. The back-to-back disasters exposed the limits of the country's emergency response. State of calamity declarations enabled the rapid release of funds, but overlapping crises stretched logistics and delayed the arrival of critical supplies. Local officials struggled to track evacuees as families moved from one shelter to another, and medical teams reported shortages of essential medicines for chronic illnesses. Climate scientists observing the storm warned of a dangerous trend. Dr. Rosa Perez of the University of the Philippines explained that warmer ocean and atmosphere increase the potential intensity of tropical cyclones, meaning we can see higher peak wind speeds and heavier rainfall. But this does not automatically mean more storms form. Sea surface temperatures in the Western Pacific were well above normal during Fung-Wong's approach, fueling its rapid intensification. The compounding of disasters, Kalmaegi then Fung-Wong, left communities with saturated soils, damaged infrastructure, and a humanitarian system under continuous strain. Experts called for faster, more adaptive reallocation of resources and stronger early warning systems. For those still at risk or in need of rescue, official updates and emergency hotlines remained the most reliable lifeline. Call NDRRMC at 0289111406 or 091758953990. For Aurora province, call 042-209-741 or 091781496773. Today, stronger storms hit more often, and recovery windows keep shrinking. For the Philippines, each cyclone season tests a nation already stretched to its limits. As seas warm, the next crisis is not a question of if, but when. Preparedness now decides tomorrow's survivors.